All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of a Step Ahead Adoption Services podcast. This is Dr. Andy Bonanti, your host. Today, I have the pleasure of having Valerie Trumbauer with me. Valerie is a postpartum doula, lactation counselor, and a mom of three, including identical twins. And I was glad to hear that they are in a much later stage than my little one, so I'm sure that'll come up during the call. With over 10 years of experience, Valerie has helped hundreds of parents adjust to their new families. She understands the chaos that the few first months with a new baby, all the excitement that can certainly be overwhelming. I think most of us have been there. So having the support during that time can make all the difference. Valerie teaches expectant parents what they need to know to feel confident and prepared when their baby arrives. So without further ado, Valerie, what can new parents expect emotionally in those first few days and weeks?
Hey, Andy, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I always love connecting with adopting families. So when we jump in by talking about the first week, I talk to my doula clients and to my community about this often, where I have doula clients whose babies come to them through pregnancy, through surrogacy, through adoption. There are some things where the things that we'll talk about, the prep and things like that, it does not matter how your baby comes into your life. And then there's some things where certain situations make areas more challenging. And I think when we think about that first week and, what it can look like and what you can expect emotionally, sometimes it does look different for adopting families, because sometimes what my doula clients will say is, they worry, is the baby crying because, if would the baby be crying if I were the birth mother? And the answer comes in that, I really try to push towards preparation, because when you can understand that crying is the baby's only form of communication, it flips the switch on that. And it's like, that baby is crying simply, speaking to you in a language that you're not fluent in. It can help to think of it that way, because things that can be one aspect of life with a newborn that's really emotional, is like the baby's crying. Is he feel like he isn't safe? Is something else wrong here? And it's like, let's really dig in here and understand why the baby's crying. Is he crying and his tummy's really hard? Is he crying, and he's stretching, or different things that will give us that piece of that. So when we think of those first days and weeks, what to expect is a little bit of, it's not probably the answer that is super comforting here, but it's like a little bit of an emotional roller coaster, because there is this joy and just this feeling of being so blessed for this moment that you have been waiting for so long. And then there is adjusting to what sleep looks like with a newborn, adjusting to, a baby who's communicating through crying and understanding that crying and getting to know the baby. And so I think if we can not paint this picture of unicorns and rainbows, but more say, like, this is how it's going to look, and that's okay. It's okay if every moment doesn't feel like the biggest blessing ever. It's like, okay, this is awesome. And then the middle of the night was rough and I wasn't exactly sure what he wanted. And so it can be a very emotional time, but I think being okay with when you can prepare in that way and understand that this is what it'll look like, people, that adjustment can go a lot more smoothly.
Thank you. That's a great response. And you've said so many things that I really want to just respond to, but I want to also stay on track. I recall when I was really early into my healthcare career, I worked with a lactation consultant, and when it came to labor and delivery, some of the postpartum care and that bonding with the little one, I I can remember how amazing this individual nurse was with the patients and how much of a difference that she made. And as an adoptive parent, I feel as though I certainly missed out on that part of the journey. And I imagine others do as well. So again, great to have you on the show and hear all about the ways that we can help bridge some of that gap with adoptive families.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
So many parents, probably parents in general, but I'm going to focus on adopted parents, worry about bonding with their babies right away. Is it normal if a connection isn't, let's say, instant?
100%. And I mean, we're concentrating here. Our discussion is around adoption. And I think sometimes in those situations, as an adopting parent, you have these feelings of, I was supposed to look at the baby and, see this, little movie play out of the next 18 years. And that's not happening for me. And I don't feel that connection. Reality is many parents don't feel that connection even when they're giving birth to the baby, even when, the baby's, when there was surrogacy. But when we're talking about adoption and bonding, I think first of all, like we're saying, is it normal? The entire, for what we call in the doula world, the fourth trimester, from the time that your baby is born until the time that your baby's 3 months old. This is the fourth trimester. Showing yourself so much grace. I mean, I have teenagers. My daughter's 19. I have twins that are 16. So I'm all for showing yourself grace in parenthood forever. But when we're talking about this time of the fourth trimester, showing yourself grace in how you're feeling, in the emotions that you're having, in being honest with yourself of as far as like, okay, this part feels hard, or this wasn't what I thought it was going to be like, and that's okay. And having the people in your life who you can be really honest with. There's going to be the people where they're like, how's it going? You're like, it's great. And that's not the person you're unpacking all of this with, but having those couple of friends where it's like, actually, this part kind of sucks and this is how I'm feeling. And that person, whether they're a parent or not, is there for that. And so you probably will have those feelings of the bonding doesn't feel like an instant connect. Not that you probably will. A lot of people feel that way. So I just say that it is normal, but there's a lot of things that are normal that when you're in it, you're like, wait, I didn't think this was going to happen to me. And allowing yourself to view all of this as, okay, this is normal for me. I'm showing myself grace. The fourth trimester is really challenging. And I'm going to, have my people who are my sounding board, who aren't looking for me to feel like #blessed every second of the day. And so if that happens and you're feeling like that bonding isn't happening instantaneously, please don't beat yourself up about it. It isn't something, it's not like in the movies. So yeah, to answer your question, it's completely normal.
And it's safe to say that bonding is so different for each parent. Even in our household, so our daughters are growing up with two dads, but the bonding between my daughter and I versus the bonding between my daughter and my husband, so different. And I think, that really builds off of the relationships that we've built throughout our entire lives that have led up to this point. So really, when it comes to bonding, what's normal and what's not, I think it's all subjective.
Yeah, for sure. And I think setting aside, the same thing is true in my house, where it's like the the bonding and relationships that my kids have with my husband, it looks very different than it does with me. And I think when you're looking at what does it look like when you have this brand new baby, how can we set up our lives so that each of us has the opportunity to bond? It's great that you're all this little family and this is so fantastic, but a lot of this connection is going to come one-on-one. So it could be like, in the morning, I'm more of like an early bird. So in the morning when the baby wakes up, I'm just going to swoop in, grab the baby, and then we're going to go sit on the porch and I'm going to feed the baby there and, talk about the birds or whatever, whatever's happening outside. And, okay, my husband is going to take this, if my husband's going to go somewhere where he can wear the baby and run errands, he's going to do that. And he's talking to the baby as he's going through the grocery store. It's these little moments. It doesn't need to be like, okay, we're going to put in the calendar on Tuesday afternoons, you're bonding with the baby. It's more that like, where are these little opportunities throughout our normal life where we can turn this into a one-on-one opportunity, or in the case of twins, it's not always possible. Sometimes you've done both. But where are these windows where you can each build that connection with the baby?
I like that. I think that's pretty impactful. I wish I was having this conversation with you before I had two daughters. But I'm thankful to be where I am now. But we didn't focus so much on the one-on-one. Right? We wanted to be that perfect little cookie cutter family. And it's when you're seeing someone else bond, right? Like when I'm bonding or when my husband was bonding, certainly I felt some kind of way saying, well, she doesn't do that with me, but if there was more time for that individual one-on-one, and that also gives you an opportunity to reset as a new parent. You need that too. I think it would have been impactful. So I hope those soon-to-be families are listening. So you work pretty closely with new parents and A Step Ahead Adoption Services, which offers all their clients a membership with New Parents Academy to access your services. What are some common misconceptions that you hear about parent-infant bonding?
I think that there's a couple of different things that come to mind here. I feel fortunate to have the relationship with A Step Ahead that I do, and I'm honored to be able to be a resource for all of the families, and that has been amazing, and getting to know Valerie as well. When we're thinking about what are those misconceptions, I think it comes from, well, partially it's social media. Partially it's your experience that your friends have told you this, and maybe those friends weren't in an adopting situation, but you still had that picture of what it looks like for them, or your friends, coworker adopted and they told you this story about this, and you're kind of fed all of this information the same way that, you hear about like when someone's pregnant and everyone's telling them about, this delivery and that. Here it's people, as soon as they hear that you're adopting, it's like, oh, my sister's neighbor adopted, and then this and that, and I think it opens up to either this beautiful picture of like, oh my gosh, it was perfect for those people, or like, oh, it was a total train wreck for my sister's friend at work. And I think taking all of, just deciding right now, like there is a filter, like you can either be like, you know what, actually, I don't want to hear your story. I'm all for like saying what you think here, or hear this and decide that like you're writing your own story and you're open to kind of rotating when need be. A lot of new parents end up stepping away from social media just because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing all of these picture perfect people, and meanwhile my baby's waking up every 42 minutes, So it's the same when we're talking about bonding. There's, oh, it was immediate for us, or like, no, after the baby's 6 months old, different things where I think you need to, if you're someone who feels best when they've prepared, which that is what I really, really encourage people to do, so that you're making decisions with, like current guidelines in mind, where you're like, oh, I know this about newborn sleep, so I'm not taking that personally, or, you're making decisions as far as that goes, but really to decide that you're going to write this story for yourself, and that what this bonding looks like, it's going to be different from other things that you might have heard. So it really, I think social media, it's a blessing and a curse. Sometimes it's hard to see how it's a blessing, but a lot of the misconceptions come from there.
Yeah, bonding's pretty individualized. I think we all have what happens in real life and then what happens on Facebook, right? Like our Facebook lives are very different.
Oh,
Um,
100%. And I think there's times in our lives like where we're almost like at this raw point where other times where you're like, oh, I don't even care what those people are doing. There's certain times you have, especially a first baby. It's like you just brought home your first baby. You're suddenly like, wait a second, am I doing this right? Am I feeling what I'm supposed to feel? Is the baby doing what the baby's supposed to do? And I still, 19 years later, it's like, there, you watch all these videos of people dropping their kids off at college. It's like, okay, I just dropped my daughter off at college. Like it happened. It doesn't stop happening, but deciding how you let that filter run through you, I think is really important, because we're just in such a time where you have this very interesting view into other people's lives, and it can spiral you. And bonding is one place where it's like, oh, well, this person I follow on YouTube just adopted, and this is what happened to them. This is what happened to them in the 7-minute video you saw. This is not, take what you want from that and then throw the rest out.
it's so funny. Sometimes we even forget, right? This was a couple months ago. There was a photo, a memory on Facebook. It came up where we were carrying our first daughter in the little car seat carrier, and everything looked perfect. And when I looked at that photo, I immediately thought how terrified we were that the hospital just handed this 2-day-old baby to us, right? And we're now responsible for an entire new human being. And when my husband looked at it, he was like, oh my gosh, wasn't that the best time ever? He was just as terrified. It's just, like sometimes we look back and I think that I want to, give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes when they're sharing their own experiences, they can forget what it was actually like.
100%. And when I'm very active on Instagram, and I try to share like a lot of tips and just little nuggets to help you as you're preparing. And so often there'll be a comment where like not too long ago, I shared this, like, what does a postpartum doula do at night? As a postpartum doula, I work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And people are like, wait, what is that? What do you do? So it was this reel of these little snippets. And it's like, I throw in the baby laundry. I I feed the baby a bottle or bring the baby to be fed. Now I like made this crock pot meal. And then I, got the baby burped and soothed back to sleep. And I go through this whole thing, it's social media, so it happens in 30 seconds. And as far as to answer the question, like, what do the postpartum doulas do at night? You can look on that reel and there's all these comments of, we did this for ourselves. A lot of times, and I don't want to like pigeonhole grandparents here, but it is very often people who are later in their life who are like, we did this ourselves, must be nice. And I did it fine, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, first of all, okay, I think we can learn. When we know better, we do better. Secondly, I don't think you're remembering this right here, sister, because it probably wasn't, it was like, I did all of that and this. And it's like, did you? So I think you're going to have situations like that where it's like, oh, we're trying to follow these wake windows and we're going to put the baby to sleep now. And somebody's like, well, what I used to do is I would keep the baby up until 6 and then he'd sleep for 12 hours. And it's like, I feel like you're probably not remembering this right here, Grandma. But, so that's where I think the whole like take what you want and leave the rest behind is important as well, because very often people are remembering incorrectly the same way you're saying that. And I have pictures that I look back at and I'm like, oh, look at me, here I am bringing my first child home. And meanwhile, I'm like, holy smokes, like we had no clue. I was like, I'm not using a pacifier for 3 weeks. It is the first night, and I remember ripping open 3 different types of pacifiers, trying to get her to take something. And we're just like, how do we make this baby stop crying, But until you really dig into it, you're like, oh, I didn't remember it that way at all. So I think that's important for brand new, parents to realize, is that these stories people are telling you, they're a little fuzzy.
And I sat there when you just shared what you posted on Insta, and I thought, man, wow, how come we didn't have one? So I think it's, different strokes for different folks, right? Like if we could have something like this, why not?
Oh, and that's the other thing where, yeah, I think there's a couple different, like, there'll also be comments. I mean, like on there's probably thousands of comments. Some of them will be like, must be nice. Like, you must be like, oh, like as if this person must be super wealthy, which like someone who's hiring a postpartum doula every night for the first 8 weeks. Yeah, they're probably in a different bracket than you and I. But I also have worked with families where there's like a group of girlfriends who every time someone has a baby, they give one overnight with me as the gift. Cause you probably know after you have one baby, it's like, we don't really need more stuff. Like we're good on the stuff. And it's like, so, they all pool their money and give one night of overnight doula services. So that's another, like, don't believe, like, the stories people are telling themselves where it's like, oh, I could only have that if I had a lot of money, or I can't have that, or, I should be doing this all myself or something like that. It really, I think a lot of those comments come from the angry comments come from people who are probably wish that they might have been able to have that happen, and it just wasn't something that they could have done. And I totally understand that. I didn't even know what a postpartum doula was when I had my kids. So trust me, I wish I had one too.
Well, someone has to put that out there where like give one night, because I'm often thinking about all these, baby shower gifts and ideas. And I feel like that's just an untapped market of having like a postpartum doula one night. That's awesome. So let's make sure we put that out there into the world.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it's funny because one of those group of girlfriends, I ended up going during the day. I don't usually work during the days, but this was like, I was going for a few hours and she was kind of splitting it up in a different way. So at any point I get there and I knock on the door, and there was like a miscommunication where she got her weeks confused, and she like thought that whatever, she didn't plan for me to be there that day. And it was the day that her mother-in-law was also there. So she's like, I was like, that's okay. Like, I'm not gonna step on your mother-in-law's toes at all. Like, I'm gonna come in and like swoop around and do these other things, and you're gonna get to take a nap and a shower. And so it was in a situation where now like she's upstairs, mom's upstairs taking a shower. The mother-in-law and I are in the kitchen and we're getting ready to give the baby a bath. And the mother-in-law is like, what is it you do? And you could tell that she was like so skeptical. And she's like, what? And I'm like talking through it. It's nothing new to be able to have to explain what a postpartum doula does. And we just had such like an interesting conversation about it. Then I go on, I'm there for hours. She's there. By the end, she's like, do they have these by me? I want my friends are going to want to give this to their daughter for, and it was like, just it's something that people don't understand, like what a postpartum doula is, what they do. And it was just such a funny thing where in the midst of 3 hours, she's like, do they have these in Buffalo? I'm like, I'm sure they do have them in Buffalo.
I love that. Okay. Well, adoptions sometimes are unpredictable. I know both my adoption stories very different from my girls. How can these experiences affect bonding, and what can parents do to kind of build on that connection afterward?
I think obviously state by state, there's different regulations. I live in Pennsylvania where a birth mother has up to 30 days to change her mind. And that certainly does play into things as you're like trying to bond with this baby who also you're kind of things are still being figured out. And there's not an answer that really is any different than any other answer I've given. It's like, be okay, be accepting of the feelings that you're having. Show yourself grace, have someone you can talk to about these feelings. If you're not adopting with a partner, then it's someone else. If it's you and your partner, like there's a lot of emotion around this, and giving yourself permission to feel the way that you feel. There's not a way you should be feeling. There's not something by now I should feel this and I should be sure and do this. Being okay with each situation. You said each of your 2 situations were different. Each adoption situation is so different that it's not like, well, if this happens, make sure you do this. It's I think preparation, it's a hill I'll die on. I think preparation makes a huge difference, so that you do, you're not spending time like worried about something that is normal for a newborn. But also, so I think there's preparation, and then there's being okay with how you're feeling in that situation.
So I'm going to share a little bit about my most recent adoption. So my second daughter, Harper, special shout out to Harper. She was a NICU baby. So this was a new experience for my husband and I. And what's unique to the NICU situation is we're in the hospital for 42 days and nights, and she's not ours, right? She is still on paper. She's not the birth moms, but on paper, she belongs to the adoption agency. Similar in state of Florida, 30 days. The mom, no, the dad, it's different in Florida, it's the dad. The dad could come out of the woodwork. None of that happened, but I can remember feeling like I was in my feels about she's not ours yet. And the bonding, I will say, in the hospital, and then there's a lot of one-on-one time, you're holding your baby in the NICU and trying to get her to a point where she can be discharged. But I can remember that connection, that bond was very difficult. And in the back of my mind, it was on me. It was because I didn't feel like she was ours yet. What advice would you have for a parent that's kind of putting up the self-blockade because of these adoption, obstacles?
Yeah, NICU visits are fairly common in the adoption world, and I have like a whole video about NICU in my course just for that reason, because navigating the NICU, it sounds like you said you sat there holding the baby. That's great. Sometimes it's hard to navigate that time because it's like you said, like we're not the parents, but we're not, so navigating that time can be tricky also. And I think there's a risk, there's like a vulnerability that is required, right? Because you could have sat there for 42 days and left the hospital with no baby. And that is some people's story. And I think during that time, it's raw, like you're like, okay, I'm going all in. I'm going to do my best here, realizing that this could have so many different outcomes. And so there is that vulnerability of like, we're going to go every day, or we're going to go when we, whatever this looks like for you, and going all in on what you decide works for you, and you and your partner, because some people have come into situations like that after other situations like that ended with them leaving without a baby. I have families in my course who, it's been a very long road. And so it's like, what if you were sitting there and you had already been in a situation just like that, 8 months prior? Then you sit there and you're like, am I really supposed to do kangaroo care with this baby chest to chest and do all of these things? And it's like, there is a vulnerability that is, that not that it's required. You need to make the best decision for yourself, but I think you would probably agree. Like, there's a point at which you're like, we just gotta go through the motions here, and if prayer is your thing or whatever, there's a point where no one knows what the answer is, and you kind of have to decide where, what that journey looks like for you.
Yeah, I think, again, leaning into my personal experience, ultimately, for me, it was the baby needed someone, whether we were the ones or not. The baby needed someone, and thankfully, we needed her back, and she's ours forever. But I know that doesn't work out for all people. But ultimately, it's just about this innocent little being that is entirely reliant on the care and the emotional support of others, which is pretty huge when you think of that.
For sure.
So, in your role as postpartum doula, what are some simple, effective ways you can guide adoptive parents to build that secure attachment in those early days. I know we talked about it already a little bit, but if you could just bullet some, like, if there's anything out there quick and effective.
Yeah, I think one-on-one time, wearing the baby, reading to the baby, understanding that the baby just wants to hear your voice, the inflection of your voice. It doesn't even, you can sit there and tell the baby everywhere you'd like to ever show this baby, and like, this is everywhere we're going on vacation in your lifetime, or you can literally like read People magazine. It does not matter. Like, the baby wants to hear the inflection of your voice, wants to be close to you. That connection is going to come through when you're wearing the baby. You'll hear these little grunts. Your baby will hear your heartbeat, and all of that is just so wonderful for bonding. Skin to skin time, just one-on-one time with parents. So just setting that time aside. And it's not, people will say, I just had a message the other day from someone who was like, how long? Oh, I know what it was. They were doing this. They had like a support call with me. And she was like, how long should it be before we let our siblings see the baby? And how long should it be for people who aren't our siblings? And like, what do you think for bonding? And there's not an answer. And she was talking about like the parent siblings, not the baby siblings, just to clarify. And it was like, there's not a right answer. I mean, I'm always like, use me as an excuse if you want to. If you don't want anyone to be around for the first month, you can say like, your doula said you should stay in your house and bond with the baby. But I think be really, really aware of visitors, because before you know it, so many people are so happy for you. They can't wait to meet the baby. They've been praying for you for so long. They might have fundraised with you. And now the baby's finally here. And it's like, when can we stop by and meet the baby? And I think it can easily turn into like a parade of people or people who stay a long time. It's like, decide what you want the first couple of weeks or month to look like for you, and be really protective of that time, because you're going to you're going to be unsure of yourself. You're getting to know the baby. You're trying to, it's an adjustment for the baby as well, like living outside the belly. So there's a lot that's going on. And what, aside from the things we talked about with the one-on-one time and the reading and wearing the baby and all of that, it's like, be protective of your time so that you have time to just be with the baby.
So you already talked a little bit about some of the closeness with skin to skin, baby wearing. We haven't talked about co-sleeping. I'm going to interject my own bias. I remember skin to skin just being weird. Like it wasn't my thing. And I'm one of those that I'm not a big fan of, like, people invading my personal space anyway. A little different for a baby, but I am 100% all about co-sleeping. So I can't wait to hear your response.
Well, so I will say this. So first of all, let's speak to you not being into skin to skin. This is a perfect example of like, I can sit here and list off 15 things that are like, here, and then you should do this and do this. But in the end, you should do what works for you. And so it's like, if let's say, 5 years ago, you was listening to this podcast and it's like, well, she said we should do skin to skin. And then you do skin to skin and you're like, this does not feel comfortable. Like this is not how I want to be spending time with my baby. That's when you're like, okay, well, this part isn't for me. So it's constantly that like, okay, I'm going to prepare and understand what the options are. And then when it's real life, I'm going to do what I find works for me. And so, I think if you're in a situation like that, 100%, it's not going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to set the timer. Now I'm going to do my 20 minutes of skin to skin because, the podcast I listened to told me to do that. I think it's really important to understand, okay, so in that situation, it would have been like, well, she talked about skin to skin, but she also talked about wearing the baby. She talked about reading to the baby, sitting outside and talking to the baby about, things like that. So I think that's great to hear from you. Actually, that wasn't something you like, because I think it's important to understand, like, these are these are suggestions and they're not all going to be for you. Some people are like, wearing the baby feels like, like I'm afraid I'm going to fall. I'm afraid I'm going to drop the baby, like whatever. Then don't, then you're going to want to get used to wearing the baby, or like, you're not going to want to wear the baby as much when they're little or whatever. As far as co-sleeping goes, so I'm based outside of Philadelphia. I'm in the US. I would imagine that most of your families are in the US, but on Instagram and my course members, they're based all around the country. So all around the world. So I always say I'm based in Pennsylvania, and the guidelines that I share are in line with organizations in the United States. Primarily the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The difference between those, just to give your listeners a little bit of the American Academy of Pediatrics is going to give guidelines around your baby's health when they're saying things like how much tummy time should the baby have, and when should the baby be, rolling over, things like that when it comes to the baby's health. Guidelines around products come from the Consumer Product Safety Commission. When there's a recall on something, that's coming from the CPSC. All of that being said, the American Academy of Pediatrics, or the guidelines that I share, the American Academy of Pediatrics does not recommend co-sleeping. What I talk to my course members about is understanding what the guideline from the American Academy of Pediatrics is, understanding that that you may feel differently. And if you want to go down the road of co-sleeping, for example, then you're going to want to research how to do that safely. And I think, that is an important step in that. A lot of people love co-sleeping, and there's resources out there to help with that, but it isn't something that I point to as a way to bond with the baby.
It's so funny with technology too. There's so many ways to effectively feel as though you're co-sleeping without actually co-sleeping, right? They have those bassinets that almost attach, or they do attach to the bed.
Mm-hmm. They're right there. Yep.
Yep. And I guess that's not really considered co-sleeping, but if you ask me, that's as close to co-sleeping as you can get.
Right. Well, when someone's saying co-sleeping, that's generally actually one of them is called a co-sleeper. But when the baby's in their own sleeping space, then that wouldn't be considered co-sleeping. But then that's a great thing for a lot of people, is to have the baby right there. Or sometimes it's, the baby's in like an actual bassinet that doesn't attach to the bed. The baby's right there. The American Academy of Pediatrics guideline right now is that the baby's in your room for 12 weeks, for 3 months, which is a long time. And that's another thing where it's like, okay, I want to get my baby out of there before 3 months. He's a noisy sleeper. He's not sleeping well. I'm not sleeping well. That's another time where it's like, okay, you want to do something that is not in line with the guideline of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Let's talk about how to do it safely and kind of down that road. But all of that to say that the guideline is that the baby is sleeping in your room in the beginning, and that is for, that's for bonding, that's for attachment, that's there. It's it is shown to lower the risk of sudden infant death syndrome. But by having the baby in your room, you can hear those, you hear the baby start to wake up. You might remember that, where you're like, I hear her reaching around, like she's going to be awake soon. Okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom and get her bottle and get ready to feed her or whatever. So there is, even if, you're not making that decision to co-sleep, you're making that, hopefully the baby's in your room, at least in the beginning, in the first weeks or months until you transition out of your room. But that is great for attachment as well.
Well, I'm so glad that you encourage everyone to do their research, because I think that that's an important piece. And, there's this whole feeling of being overwhelmed and all of things. But if you're anything like me, research could help you feel a bit relieved, knowing what could, what's safe, what's not, and just seeing, and in writing, even when it comes to placement of where the crib should go. Yeah, one of the most bizarre things was, don't put the crib next to a window. Like, I would have never even thought of that, but that's a thing, right? There could be storms, windows can break, and all these things that you don't know if you don't know. And I don't think really anyone pushes new parents to do the research. It's more through storytelling. But that's a really important piece to raising children effectively and safely in today's generation.
Well, and guidelines are constantly changing. And the same way, like, I couldn't, wake up tomorrow and do your job with, because people are like, we're just going to wing it. And it's like, okay,
Yeah.
you can do that. Like, but it's going to be easier if you don't. Like, and
Right.
you're not winning like, why not prepare? Why not understand what current guidelines are? Why not understand what these cues mean? Things like that, where it's just like, it's just easier if there's preparation. And especially for adopting families, like, you're in this, for so many people, you're in this waiting time of just like, what are we doing? We're just waiting to be matched. And let's use this time to help you prepare for when you get that call and you're like, okay, now we know. Because our brain plays tricks on us where it's like, you get that call and you're like, wait a second, are we ready? Do we know what we're doing? Should we be responsible for someone else? My goal is that you get that call and you're like, yes, we've got it. I already favorited the videos I want to go back and rewatch. And I know exactly, what I need to bring with me when we get on the plane and things like that. So I think preparation is important for everyone, but I think for adopting families, it can be a really powerful way to utilize this waiting time that can feel so helpless to really turn a positive light to it.
This is great. And I'm going to go against some adoption agencies and adoption services because I agree. I think preparation goes a long way, but I have worked with particular adoption agency that said, don't prepare, right? And I don't think they meant don't prepare as in mentally and all the things. They said, don't get a baby or a nursery room ready. Don't start purchasing things because we know that the adoption journey can have its ups and downs, and that could lead to, feelings of depression and hurt. But to mentally prepare and do the research is different. And I just think as a expected adoptive parent, I didn't hear that was okay. I heard don't do anything. So when it was go time, it was go time, and I was not ready. So I think it's really a balance, right? Work with your adoption coach to make sure that you are still mentally preparing and you're still doing all the things. And if their instruction is just don't get a nursery room ready, then don't get the nursery room ready. But there's still plenty of other things that you can do. I wish I would have even had like an Amazon cart ready to just hit.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Purchase.
I mean, regardless of the nursery, it's like I have inside of my course, I have a list of the first 30 days. Here's the gear you need for the first 30 days. That does not mean buy this gear now. It means when you need this list, if you are someone who feels better buying it before, great. If you're somebody who's like, when we get on the plane, I'm going to buy it. When the paperwork gets signed, I'm going to buy it. Whatever it is, it's like, here's your list here. Like, so what makes you feel prepared? It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to have it physically with you. It doesn't mean you have to have set up a nursery. It means that you have your next few steps because it's such a chaotic time, as you probably know. You're like, well, you just need your game plan. And so that's where that preparation comes. And it's things that people don't think about. I try to talk to adopting families about things where it's like, do you know who's watching your dog when you get the call? Like let's get your whole plan down here so that there is not a doubt in your mind. You're like, yes, we're good. Okay, I know what I'm doing here. I've got my plan.
Well, Valerie, I wish I would have met you years ago, but this is good.
I was all this time. Yes, I'm sorry I didn't know you, Andy.
Our listeners will at least benefit. So thank you. Okay, so let's switch gears, talk a little bit about feeding as part of the bonding journey. We know that bottle feeding for adoptive parents, that feeding time can deepen connection. What are some ways that can happen? Like just walk us through that process.
I think feeding is just another time where you're one-on-one with the baby. And so making the best use of that time where, the choice is, okay, I'm going to sit in the middle of the living room and my husband's friends from work are over and I'm just going to chat with them. And not that you can never do that, but there's also the opportunity of like, hey, I'm going to step away. I'm going to go to the nursery, or I'm going to go in my room, and you're going to talk to the baby and, sing to the baby or whatever. It's just another opportunity for bonding. I'm certainly not saying like no one besides you should ever give the baby a bottle. That is not my point. My point is we're just looking for those opportunities where you can bond with the baby, and feeding is one of those.
And for new parents that are feeling overwhelmed, which can sometimes lead to challenges of feeling anxiety, inadequacy, and I can even think of like even times when feeding, latching was an issue with our first. How might this feeling of inequity or anxiety affect bonding, and what support would you recommend for new parents?
I think it's important it's going to sound like what I've said before, but it's important that you're talking to someone. And in this situation, it might be an adoption professional, which people feel like they're like, I can't tell them it's anything but like sunshine here, but they have resources that can help you. I've spoken at conferences about post-adoption depression, which is a very real thing that people feel like they're like, no, like I don't have like this can't be happening to me. Is this even possible? Is this a thing? And it's like post-adoption depression is very much something that could be happening. And I think being really aware of how you're feeling and really open to people close to you so that you can talk through that. And it's not like everything is like, okay, well, I'm feeling really sad. This isn't what I pictured. Okay, well, you probably have post-adoption depression and you should be medicated. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying like everything else, it's like have your village. Have your village where you're turning to these people. It doesn't have to be, if you're like, oh, I saw a therapist before, but that they don't even talk to, they don't specify an adoption. Nothing like just talk to people. I have a friend, but they didn't adopt, that she gave birth. Okay, still speak to the people in your village. Our world has changed a lot over the past couple of 100 years, where having a new baby is much more of a lonely time than it was for our ancestors. We were surrounded by people who were there to support you and there to show you things. And that's not how it is. Now we're kind of closed up in our homes, and then COVID happened and we were literally closed up in our homes, and you're going at it alone. And that's not the way it should be. And so I think find your network and find the support systems. And it's just asking. It's asking a friend. It's asking your physician. It's asking, just different routes of where, depending on what's going on. It's hard to speak to each thing that could be going on, but don't be afraid to be open to asking for help or for, just kind of help in navigating what you're going through.
Well, thank you again. I'm going to pivot to our last question. I am going to be honest, this question was put on for selfish reasons. Okay. So again, very different scenarios with my two little ones. But I know that with our first, routines, responsiveness to the baby cues really helped build that trust and that attachment with our first. And I've already shared a little bit of how I may have had some walls up with our second daughter because of the NICU. But I will say tapping into those different cues, those baby cues, was much more difficult with our second. And NICU baby screams, I feel like, are different and the worst sound in the world. So what are some tips, if you have any, on how we as new parents can really tune into these early signals that babies provide us?
I'm sorry that you had that experience, and that does make for a hard road, especially if you have a toddler and you're navigating that time. The baby's cues, for people who are not familiar with this, so this is how your baby is going to let you know what he needs, because obviously, your baby's not talking. So how do you know if your baby's hungry or tired or cold or has a tummy ache? And there's different things that you can look for to understand, like, oh, the baby's and very often we'll cut down on the amount of crying, because it's like before the baby cries, there were probably cues that would help you to understand what's going on there. And so when you know what to look for, it can be helpful. And when you know what that looks like, so it's like, okay, if the baby rubs his eyes, he's probably tired. Okay, but a baby rubbing his eyes doesn't look like you or I rubbing his eyes. It honestly looks like a baby who's trying to claw his eyes out. It's like babies have no control over their arms. Now your baby's like slapping his hand against his face. So understanding like, okay, what is the cue I'm watching for? What does that look like? And what am I supposed to do when I see it? And that is the guideline. And then you're saying, well, for my second baby, that was a harder transition. So sometimes it's like, that's not what it looks like for her. That when she was hungry, she did this, not that. And so understanding there's different ways that the baby can tell you things. And then sometimes it's just like, well, gosh, this baby does this when he needs to burp, and that's not usually what a baby's doing. So understanding that there are a lot, and it might look different, sometimes if you can catch the early cue, it's like, gosh, I never even realized when she did that 10 minutes before this, that meant she was hungry. So really the preparation again is so, so important. And then just kind of being on the lookout for those things and marking, putting two and two together. And I'll tell families, like, keep a notes file, because they'll be like, well, I'm going to try to see if we let her go this long between feedings, then is she going to sleep longer? It's like, okay, well, and there's questions you ask before you're like cutting out a feeding or something, but it's like, okay, if you're going to try that, keep a notes file on how the night's going. And I would say the same to you. If we were having this conversation and, you had a 3-month-old baby or let's say you have a 2-month-old baby, she just came home from the hospital, you're really struggling with understanding her cues. It's like, okay, I want you, if you were my doula client, I would, say, I want you to, when she's having those freak out screaming sessions where it's the sound you've never heard before, it's so awful, I want you to think back as soon as that starts, what did the previous 10 minutes look like? Or something like that, where we can start to put these puzzle pieces together where it's like, oh, okay, that's what that was. And just kind of a little bit of detective work.
Well, I love that. Parenting is something that you can be as prepared as you want to be, but you're never really prepared, right? Even if it's not your first, we get new surprises every step of the way.
Yeah, each baby is so different. So yeah, it can be challenging.
But it's funny because you say, and I think that I was just more in tune with the first because I wasn't feeling as overwhelmed, which seems a little, backwards. But I was able to connect, okay, she did this, right? And so I know that she's getting hungry or getting tired. And it was connecting those pieces, but having a toddler and a NICU experience and all the feelings of being overwhelmed with the second one, I think that new parent brain had that disconnect where if it were the alphabet, I wouldn't even been able to put it in order. So
Right.
That probably added to not being able to pick up those early signals. So a journal would have been very helpful, Valerie, but
yes,
you were not
honestly,
around.
bringing in support, like you could have a postpartum doula come in just 3 hours a day, twice a week for 2 weeks. And it's like just someone, when I get to someone's house, one of my doula clients, they usually open up a notes file and start, and I say, like, keep a notes file. And then, as I'm getting there and getting set up and they're rattling off the questions. It's like, what's the flaky thing on his head? Why do you think this happened? He spit up after this. Is this weird? And having a place to go with all of those questions where that you're getting like current reliable information. It's just this, it sounds like there was this big weight on your shoulders as a new parent the second time around. And if you can let some of that off and give that to someone else where you're like, can you just help me get a game plan? Like, my toddler wakes up at this time and the baby wakes up screaming and I don't know what she needs. And she goes from sleeping to screaming in 10 seconds, and somebody who helps you get your game plan. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of looking for the support that you need at that time. So I think that that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Valerie, I think I've learned so much. So thank you for being on the show. And look at us overachievers. We were able to deliver our August episode with days to spare. So thank you again for that and the flexibility for this month and scheduling.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yep. And listeners, remember, adoption is not just a process, it's a journey filled with love, resilience, and hope. Next month, we'll have another mother on. She's a mother of adoptive and biological children. She'll share some of the ins and outs of her parenting adventures. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about A Step Ahead Adoption Services, just visit their website at www.stepaheadadoption.com. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next month on next month's episode.